The problem with change in organisations today is it is very top-down in nature, and in essence it is done to people. More than 70% of organisational transformations fail. And in my work I ask the question, why is that so? Why do more than 87% of leaders and managers all around the world say that culture and engagement is critical or urgent? The reason is a lack of clear purpose. Change is done to people. The way it is managed and rolled out creates fear, stress, and inertia. People are not involved in the process. And it got me thinking about what does it really take to engage stakeholders, to create value, and drive organisations successfully into the future. I realised that it can't be top-down. It has to be a pull strategy. In my 2 decades of working at the forefront of digital innovation in global advertising agencies, I saw the launch of hundreds of campaigns that were perfectly crafted, perfectly designed with an end user in mind, perfectly structured to appeal to a specific audience, yet they lacked vital human connection and context. It got me thinking about the amount of money that was invested into creating these campaigns, the demographic profiling, the channel planning, the research, the technology, all of those things that would launch with great gusto, and the people controlling those campaigns were sitting in mission control, hoping like crazy that campaign would reach its intended target. That's kind of insane when you think about it. Because once that campaign is launched, marketers don't have a crystal ball to ensure that campaign will reach its intended target. And it got me thinking about movements. And I'll tell you why, because in parallel to that context, I was getting invited to provide support and strategy on a number of professional and pro bono grassroots engagements, like the Alliance for Climate Protection Live Earth and the United Nations World Malaria Envoy. And also with the World Wildlife Fund here in Australia to create awareness around the Great Barrier Reef and the mining that was happening in the reef. And I was thinking, how do we move from a traditional campaign model and leverage the things that cause a movement to spark and flourish to transform the culture, the impact and the legacy of an enterprise? So I started to think about movements and unpack what was actually happening in a movement. So if we see that a traditional campaign is like a rocket that is perfectly crafted, launched, and you hope that it's going to reach the people that you intend it to, it's a media-driven thing. The difference with a movement is it's people-powered. It is infused with a purpose. And what it actually does is it's like rain on a pond, where people connected with that purpose create ripples. So if you imagine that our one-to-one conversations are like ripples on a pond, the more conversations, the more those ripples converge, like a movement gains power as it spreads. And so I started to think, can that be codified? Can what's happening there be codified? Well, the truth is you can't codify a fire. And movements are filled with passionate people. But what you can codify is the process that makes them flourish. The important thing to consider is that people are the catalyst in a movement. It's not about channel planning. It's not about statistical analysis. It's not about demographic profiling. And while all of those things can help to mobilise a movement, they're not the essence of a movement. Movements give us something to believe in. If we look at the comparison between campaigns and movements, you can see some very distinct things going on. This slide is from my book Emergent, and it looks at the X and Y of the velocity and reach of campaigns and movements and their sustainability over time. As you can see, the pink line is a rocket. It's a campaign, perfectly crafted and launched. When the fuel runs out, that is the media buy and the resources, the rocket comes down and there's no awareness. The difference with a movement, because it's people-powered and its essence is transferred from person to person, the more engagement that you can build and more connections you can create creates more ripples, and you can see it swelling over time. Now, the truth is, some movements fizzle out, but popular movements that we see, like Me Too, marriage equality, and the Never Again gun reform movement, they are right up there. And I'm going to unpack those today and give you an idea as what's driving those movements and making them sustainable. So what do they all have in common? They contain an irrefutable truth, aligned with a higher purpose. Now, I want you to remember, an irrefutable truth is a universal value that is impossible to disagree with. And when I talked earlier about campaigns lacking context, what I meant is that they actually lack the vital human story or essence. They can be, they're static, they're a moment in time, they have no soul. Whereas a movement enables people to identify that higher purpose and own that truth, and then self-actualize that truth as an extension of their own values. The irrefutable truth of the marriage equality movement is love is love. No one can disagree with that. The Me Too movement, the irrefutable truth. Now, you know, that's morphed into many different types of activities, but at the heart of that, it's saying that sexual violence against women is not okay. And the Never Again movement that's absolutely tipping the scales on gun reform in the United States is that children shouldn't lose their lives at school. These are truths that are powerful and impossible to disagree with. So when you think about today's organisations, and we see a lot of different tensions created around what they stand for. What we know is that purpose-driven companies attract and retain the best talent. That customers will buy from a company where there's a very clear line of sight to human well-being. And what we're seeing is that there's an even greater demand on organisations to be absolutely transparent around what they stand for. The problem is many leaders in these organisations don't have the confidence or the capability to realise their purpose-driven aspirations. They really don't know where to start. And that is because the skills that they've learned along the way haven't caught up with the world we live in, and the way people engage, and the way people want to create, and the way people want to partner with organisations. They're so stuck in their boxes and they don't know how to actually open that up. The thing about movements that is very powerful and how I've helped many clients over the years create stronger and more authentic engagement and alignment with their customers and their stakeholders, is to reframe context. The thing about a campaign is there's a bit of a kind of a care factor thing. When you see an piece of advertising appear on your desktop or on your television, and you think, that's got nothing to do with me. And immediately you can just switch it off, choose not to listen to it, watch it, take it on board. But the powerful thing about an irrefutable truth is it busts a hole through that wall. And it helps people to identify themselves in context with that movement. So how do you think millions of people from diverse cultures, passions, and commitments can all engage around a movement and support it? It's because of this one thing. It's because movements reframe context. The higher purpose, the irrefutable truth, enables us to see ourselves and to surrender ourselves to something greater than ourselves. Over time, I talk about the deepening of involvement in a movement. And what's actually going on is you're taking people from a one-time set of actions to a way of living and working and being, and that's it. And that is framed around the higher purpose. Those actions are very clearly, in the ice bucket challenge, let's look about that. A very simple example of tip a bucket of ice over your head, nominate someone else to do the next thing, and you're creating the ripple that way. Very, very basic, but very powerful, what happened through that. But beyond that action, where do you go from there? So to help a movement sustain, you really need to help people express the higher purpose of that movement as an extension of their own values and way of life. Movements utilise people as media to ignite purpose. And the science behind what's going on there is what I call ripple science. So while we can't codify the fire, we can codify the process of connection, initiation and transference that causes that ripple to expand. And what I'm talking about is one person talking to another person saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we need to achieve, this is the purpose, these are the actions, now go do it. And then that person becomes a champion for that movement. And then they do the same thing. And the ripples start to happen. Connection, initiation, and transference of an irrefutable truth. What this enables us to do is create context and move from a place of resistance and inertia where people go, oh, that doesn't really relate to me, to one of purpose-driven flow, where everyone is engaged around a common goal or goals. The question we need to ask is there a complex social issue or problem that intersects with our business? And for the leaders I work with, that's the first place we start. That might be homelessness, domestic violence, could be any number of things. What is that complex social issue? And how can we solve that problem through the daily operation of our business? The magic 4 that you need to remember is that a movement must have clear incentives and objectives. It has to have progressive inspiration. So it's a celebration of the niche, heroic efforts of the everyday. And to know that my small actions are contributing to something bigger. You can see the micro of what you're doing and the collective impact of that at a macro level. And most importantly, an awareness to influence. Yeah? And a feeling of ownership and a sense of contribution to that outcome. So the question I would ask you is, how do you test, fail, learn, and adapt on the fly? How do you learn to go from fixed outcomes to embracing uncertainty, complexity, and variation in your work? To building in feedback loops that help you address these challenges as a collective. Movements feel different to campaigns. And for leaders in organisations to embrace the attributes that fuel a movement, they need to learn to manage the tension between what is known and certain and what is unknown and revealed. And finally, I want to ask, what business are you really in? Thank you.